Welcome to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast, where we focus on discussing topics to help you burn fat, optimize health, and improve performance in life and sports. Transform the whole you from the inside out with the holistic method. Let's dive in. Here's your host, Debbie Potts.
Hey guys, I'm so excited to have my Aussie friend, Kirsty Woods, on the show today. We had you on the show last year sometime and wanted to reconnect and talk about what's going on in your metabolic efficiency and testing world over there. So thanks for coming on the show. And it's early in Australia right now, right? So we're starting your day off.
Morning, Debbie. Morning, listeners. I hope we're keeping well in this interesting and dynamic times.
Yeah, so we're recording this. I am in Seattle and you're in Australia, and we're just chatting about this staying at home and our, being more isolated, staying away from people. And Seattle's kind of where it started, the virus after China. And it's funny, we're just saying it's March 24th. So we're finally just getting to be a stay-at-home rule starting effective tomorrow. But I kind of wish they did it a few weeks ago so we could have just gotten through this process a little faster instead of it lingering on for probably the next 6 weeks or longer. How about you?
Yeah, so I was just mentioning, obviously in Australia, where we were a bit delayed with everything in terms of getting it here. So we're a couple of weeks behind everyone. We've just shut down non-essentials. People who have been advised that can work from home can. So as with anyone, I suppose there's a lot of unknowns and things that are out of our control at the moment. But what we do know is obviously, such as age is out of our control. But what we do know, there is actually some things within our control, which it's important to remind ourselves of, such as, coming back to the elephant in the room, which is, our metabolic health. Those with high blood sugar levels on ACE inhibitors are most at risk. So, for example, we know blood sugar levels impacts immunity. So they are things that we can focus on, and essentially being stuck at home, we've got time to cook if we can get those foods available and things like that as well.
I keep writing blogs and researching articles, and I'm trying to put together, my holistic method and how it relates to chronic stress and how chronic stress impacts all of this, including your immune system. But all these lifestyle habits and nutrition and what you talk about every day at your work, Metabolic Health Solutions, is about balancing your blood sugar, eat anti-inflammatory foods, move more, get 10,000 steps a day, get outside, just like all this stuff we've all been talking about for years and years. But now I was just starting to write an article waiting for our call that I feel like, this might be possibly a wake-up call for some people. Go, you know what? I need to take ownership of my health because I am not as strong as I should be with my immune system, and educating people the importance of health on the inside and out. And your immune system, 80% in your gut. So what should we be focusing on? Optimizing our gut health, digestion, starting with how we eat, what we eat, when we eat, and why we eat. So it's just fascinating to me, listening to all these suggestions. Everyone keeps filling up your email blogs coming in every day in the inbox. And, it's just stuff we talk about all the time. But I'm hoping, what I keep thinking of, everything, there's a gift in everything. And these horrible experiences, we always have to go, okay, analyze why are we going through this? Why is this happening? And it unites the world, like we're all dealing with around the world. So that's kind of exciting in a positive way, but also hoping that this makes people react to take care of the whole person. And when I talk about the holistic method, so I don't know, I think your job, you work with people with a lot of metabolic issues. Do you find, what you've been working on, how it connects with the virus and what you've seen working on the Australian population, people not optimizing their health, and maybe some changes and motivation for others?
Yeah, so as I said, I think these times just really bring to the forefront is how much these issues can be. And once again, hindsight is a wonderful thing. But the Chinese word for crisis actually, I don't know whether you've heard this, is the definition is danger and opportunity. So I think, as you say, it can be a blessing in disguise at not only a healthcare level, but also at the personal level, because as I said, healthcare and things like that does take a lot of time to change. Is at a personal level, think of food as our fuel. What's in my control? For example, sleep is a huge one, which I think we'll chat a bit more about later on. But if you do have a CPAP machine, even with everyone home and things like that, it is essential that we use it because of its impact on hormones, particularly in terms of food as fuel and those real foods that help, as you say, help with gut. So something like a bone broth, particularly with some apple cider vinegar in it to help draw out those micronutrients, things like zinc, which help boost immunity and fill the gaps in the gut. You've got fasting, which brings about your autophagy and is linked to that immune response, getting rid of dead, crappy cells and bringing in ones. Your vitamin D levels. So as I said, here in Australia, we still have the opportunity to head out and get some sunshine if we can, but it is something to be aware of. And I know I myself, I've set the weekly goal of meditating daily. Once again, is even giving that 10 minutes to take your mind off things, just so we can, as I said, do what we can to help minimize the impact of everything going, and possibly a bit of a wake-up call for some individuals.
Yeah, I know. And I think what our topics today we've got on our list are great, and they can correlate with how to improve your immune system and how you can optimize your health and transform the whole you to burn fat and improve your longevity and performance. And our first topic today is talking about what you've been working on in your research and findings on how you can have normal blood sugar levels but still have high insulin. So talk about that, because it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, not a problem. Before I do go on, I'd just like to note in what we're just chatting about before, if anyone does want to look up some other things from Malcolm Kendrick, who recommends, he's a GP who recommends if you do have a family member who does get really ill, he asks you to ask your GP for hydroxychloroquine. I'm not sure whether I said that right, which was originally a drug related to the effects for malaria, and I suppose has some promising signs for what we have available at the moment. So that might just be worth noting for some people.
Yeah,
I can
definitely.
put the link in the show notes. But yeah, getting back to your very interesting question is, we see in the clinic a lot of times, people that have been to their GP and they might have normal blood sugar levels, but they've got that body shape, which highlights that there's some metabolic damage. They've got the big gut. They've got these hunger signals. They're not sleeping well, all which indicates that their metabolic health might not be intact. But because they've got normal blood sugar levels, it is assumed that everything is okay. But what we found by doing testing of fasting insulin levels, which over in Australia is not a standard test, although it is available, some people might need to pay out of pocket, is we can find that they have normal blood sugar levels, but fasting insulin double, triple of what ideally you want it for weight loss. So ideally you want it around 8, although the normal range is say below 20, which is kind of looking to detect, for example, an insulinemic tumour. So for health, it can be in what's called normal range, but ideally you want it below 8, and some even say around 4 for that optimal health and to assist in weight loss. So what I suspect is happening in these individuals is it's essentially that pre-diabetes. So their insulin is high because of some of the foods that they're having, particularly carbohydrate-based foods, raise their blood sugar levels. They release insulin to get their blood sugar levels down, and because they have high insulin and their cells are responding, it's enough to get their blood sugar levels down. So everyone thinks it's okay. But that presence of high insulin, also called hyperinsulinemia, means they're inflamed, they're on the road to diabetes, and have those symptoms of metabolic damage as well, which can not only impact their day-to-day living, but as I said, their health as well.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's interesting. And you can see a lot of things with people's blood sugar with you do your metabolic assessment, the resting test to study this a little more?
Yeah, so what we have a look at through a process called Indirect Calorimetry, which is used in research and in athletes, is we can see that once again is these types of individuals are generally not burning fat because those high levels of insulin are signaling the body to burn glucose, which is why their blood sugar levels might be normal. They're not able to access their fat stores. And as I said, it's particularly for weight loss, this is really important. But even athletes, particularly endurance athletes, they need to be able to access those fat stores so that they, you know, as I said, have that endurance, don't bonk or hit the wall during their races. And not only that, is reduce their inflammation and help recovery as well.
Well, I find that as an ex-endurance athlete, that I keep learning more and more and becoming more aware of what happened to me, and what I see with other people is this chronic stress from overtraining and as well as a lifestyle. And that's what going back to coronavirus, that's just the stress everyone's feeling. You can start to see people are like, oh, I wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and I can't fall back asleep. And just this chronic stress, how that influences your blood sugar levels. Because think of it, when chronic stress accumulates and it's always on, so it's not that nice healthy hormetic type of stress, acute stress, but it's nonstop for a lot of people, and how that impacts your blood sugar levels, even if you are trying to do balancing your blood sugar with the foods that you eat.
Yeah, and on that note, I know obviously you've mentioned in a couple of podcasts and there is a wave of people exploring carnivore, and what I suspect is why it may be useful for some, particularly with high blood sugar levels, even if they may already have a reduced carbohydrate load, is because if they have intolerance to something like lectins, nuts, or dairy are some common ones, that's going to, I suppose, promote an adrenal response, which may raise blood sugar levels. So we've seen in the clinic some people who, as I said, have been eating well but might not switch to glucose burning or may maintain high blood sugar levels. But by putting that approach in place, at least as an elimination diet, short term, might see some changes there as well, because our body doesn't, simply work like math. There is those hormonal and responses such as the adrenaline gland, which can make it a little bit more complex. And as you say, it's about putting all those puzzle pieces together, finding what works at that individual level.
Yeah, I find that in FDN as practitioners, we do all the functional lab testing. And so it's really exciting to put all this information together and be a kind of a detective, health detective, and investigate in people's external, internal stressors that are contributing to their metabolic chaos. And a lot of that is, testing their gut function, dysbiosis, leaky gut, nutrient malabsorption, villi damage, but also their food sensitivities, as you're saying, how that is so important. And we did a podcast recently with Keto Mojo to test your glucose and ketones that will, kind of help you with that bioindividuality of what you need to eat. So I always think of, goals to balance your blood sugar with what you eat, but, you have to take into account your food sensitivities, your genetics, your metabolic typing they also look at. So it's just so interesting to put all this together to really figure out, all right, what's going on with your blood sugar and why do you have a high insulin as you're looking at. But it seems like there's all sorts of factors. It's really hard to say anything specific, that one thing that's causing it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose it comes back to why we, you can't manage what you don't measure. So
yeah,
as much as we can, removing that guesswork through assessment, because a lot of these factors stem from metabolism, which is why I'm lucky enough in the clinic to be able to test it, which I know not everyone has that luxury, but even, as I said, the pathology and those other things, so that we can remove some of that guesswork, particularly in as I said, some of the exceptions to the rules. So we know that, for example, the Asian population, people say that they're skinny, but their diabetes rates, they can get diabetes from much lower BMIs. For example, the average is about 24, which is within normal range. So what's suggested for these individuals by the likes of Fung, Jason Fung, which you may be familiar with, is obesity is sometimes a protective mechanism. Some people are lucky enough to get obesity, whether some of those populations, such as the Asians, is their cells get full of glucose, and that they can't store that fat, so it overspills into the blood, so they get raised blood sugar levels at a much lower BMI. So once again, we can't judge a book by its cover. We need to look at the functionality, which in my clinic I use metabolism testing to look at what's going on in the inside.
Yeah, that relates to what I keep talking about every blog post and podcast, is that, you don't know, like you said, you can only manage what you can measure. And, we always say, stop guessing and start testing. And that's the same philosophy as Keto Mojo. And that's what we do in FDN is, test, not guess. And I think all of this is just, you need to collect data instead of just guessing. I think it's so important to really figure out what program or protocol is best for you to optimize your health, is having this investigative process, knowing what's going on under the hood, because you have no idea what direction you should go by just, reading someone else's success story, or, reading some recommendations from one of the many blog posts out there. So what programs do you give people that you work with? Do you guys work on nutrition and exercise and stress and all that, sleep?
Yeah, and once again, it depends at that individual level. We find that most of the people coming into the clinic is their nutrition is the cornerstone, and then refining it with aspects with the right type of exercise. Obviously, sleep is a component. There are some things outside of my scope as well, which we may refer back to the GP. So, for example, if they've got poor mitochondrial function, supplementation may be necessary for some of those. As well, and there's some health conditions which, as I said, they may go back to their GP and specialist with for help. But it all depends on, as I said, that those individual results which dictate, okay, what do we do with these individuals? But as mentioned, is we do find a lot of them aren't burning fat, which impacts, as I said, the general symptoms of well-being. So hunger, energy, and obviously weight loss, and can display itself in terms of a lot of chronic diseases, which we see: diabetes, fatty liver, PCOS. So it's about getting to that root cause, which is hyperinsulinemia for a lot of people, which 80% of people can be down to dietary, and looking at the root cause and reducing those insulin promoting foods, which for most people come from that carbohydrate load.
So we always want to start people with nutrition. So I always talk about, what they're eating when, if they do intermittent fasting and do time restricted feeding, and how they're eating, slowly chewing their food and allowing for proper digestion and being in the parasympathetic nervous system state, so they're not eating and multitasking, and eating when they're hungry. I always think of the why, the emotional connection to what people eat is such a huge conversation with a lot of clients. It's like, we eat, especially now, people are stressed out. And I read a lot of people's posts and are fearful of gaining weight because they're eating because they're stressed or they're bored. So I think that's a big part of, working on what to eat is just one part of the puzzle of trying to get people to get that blood sugar stabilized and insulin levels regulated.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose also for the same reasons, we can't just purely rely on the scales either. Just because, for example, if someone's eating better, they've got better proteins, better building blocks, they might be improving the density of their bones, which is essentially solidified protein matrix, or, improving their body composition. Sometimes we might get someone only losing a couple of kilos, but their body composition might change by 5 or so, and that can bring about big health benefits and changes as well. Did you want me to go through a couple of examples of some types of people we see in the clinic and talk through what we might go through for them?
Yeah, I'd love that. And then I also, if you have anything, I've been asking people as yourself about mitochondria function, because you mentioned that as well. And I was curious about the methylation cycle and looking at genetics. I've been just talked to Dr. Ben Lynch the other day and rereading for my third time his book, Dirty Genes and the Methylation Cycle and a Dirty MTHFR. So I wondered if that's part of your investigation at all either, but go ahead. Just writing down all my thoughts.
Not a problem. Is obviously coming across everything that we've come across is we're aware of those gene mutations and obviously how it increases risk, but it's not something that I personally specialize in. But that efficiency which you talk about is forever so important. So we've got our mitochondria, which is, as you say, is the powerhouse of our cell. It's where the energy is made, and if they're dysfunctional, it can bring about some changes in performance and fatigue and things like that, often which we see in patients, particularly those who middle-aged females, which I'm sure you can relate to, is that efficiency tends to be poorer in those. So sometimes it's about not only setting realistic expectations, but focusing on that longevity, the central obesity, and those sorts of things, which letting them know it might take time, and there are possibly things beyond their lifestyle, which, in those populations might explore some things like, DIM and Vitex, which are some supplementation type strategies, which can help others. So it's those sorts of things which are worth a go, but not saying it's a one-size-fits-all strategy or anything like that. So what we'll do is get their baseline efficiency, put something like a supplementation strategy in place, and then retest in 3 months. But even better than that is not necessarily prolonged fasting, but short fasting or even 24-hour fasting for some of these individuals, once again, allows them to get rid of their dead, crappy cells by a process known as autophagy. And by retesting, even in a couple of weeks, we can sometimes see that improve as well, which is like a big cohort in which we see.
So that's
Jay
cool.
Wrigley.
You can do the fasting, intermittent fasting or longer fasting sessions, and then test them again and see if have their numbers improved.
Yeah, exactly. And sometimes the client that comes to mind is, as I said, they might compare themselves to what they used to be able to do with their 20, or even worse, their husbands. But if they're not seeing their desired results in terms of the scales, but they're feeling it in their clothes, and for example, this patient lost over 5 centimeters from around a central obesity, which is huge for health, we can show them that their numbers are changing to keep them motivated to ensure that they're on the right track, essentially. And Jay Wrigley talks a lot for these individuals that may be doing feeding that's better in times with their circadian rhythm. So early time restricted feeding may be something that can help that mitochondrial function and efficiency if fasting alone or improving their and cleaning up their diet alone is not enough, as well as obviously activity and preventing overtraining and all those other factors as well.
That's a thing that I think, it's never one thing, and people need to realize that everything is not just one thing by itself. Everything else is impacted. Like, even I pulled this open to write a blog about it, but Dr. Lynch talks about, methylation cycle and, chemicals, dirty genes, lack of vital nutrients, leaky gut, chronic infection, stress can all either block the methylation cycle or significantly slow it down. So, creating a program for somebody, if they have obesity issues, blood sugar dysregulation, chronic diseases, it's hard to really know what it's caused from. But that's why, we always work with nutrition first and reducing those stressors. But it's hard when people want to know, what is it exactly that caused me to be this way, or what's off, or what's broken that needs to be rebooted, and get it to, what supplement to take or what pill medication to make it work.
Yeah. A couple of points on that. I did a Facebook post yesterday, I believe, and it's talking about trusting the journey. It takes us quite a while by the time we see someone like, for example, yourself. So we've got to know that how long it took us to get into these positions. It might take maybe not that long, but it is a process. It's not an overnight thing as well. And as I said, some of that data, or as I said, particularly during these challenging times where we can't necessarily get that data, is noticing improvements in some of those other symptoms, which might be performance, energy to play with the kids, not getting those hypo symptoms and shakes when you're going for walks or doing exercises. Those things which, as I said, can sometimes also mean a lot more as well. On the note of the gene mutations, I have is it not homozygous? I've got one of the genes, but not both. So I'm on methylated folate at the moment, and I did see a correlation, not saying it's a causation, in improvement in my mitochondrial function over about a 3-month span, like a snapshot with the metabolic testing with those, which I posted about on my Twitter. So if anyone wants to keep up with any other case histories and stories and experiments, that's a good one to go to.
I never look at Twitter. I just I'll check on Instagram, Facebook, but having to do Twitter and LinkedIn and YouTube, there's just too much there. But
in all honesty, I was very resistant to do so. But I must say I have quite enjoyed the process of not only sharing, but as I said, getting that different perspective of Twitter. So a lot of articles, a lot of healthy debate as well. And then there's also a lot of that politics and unhealthy debate as well. But it has been quite a good learning curve and connecting with people, so that, as I said, you can continually improve. And so for example, I came across a podcast by Dr. Paul Mason on that on Twitter, and he had some really interesting thoughts about particularly iron in females. So what he was saying is, now a lot of pathogens need iron to spread and duplicate. So from a physiological point of view, what he talked about was when we're inflamed, which we tend to lock down our iron stores, for example, in our ferritin, and keep it there in a way to combat these things. But the issue now is it tends to be chronic. So although we have iron stores, they're not available to the body to, for example, make neurotransmitters, which is why there may be low dopamine and low pleasure responses. So it's not as simple as you've got low iron, but it's also that functionality of things. And as I said, that inflammation. So as I said, that's something I've never really come across. And then he talked about for some females, he referenced a study where they put iron infusions in place, and it helps some, particularly I think it was middle-aged females, get past a plateau, which is, as I said, things I'd never really come across if I wasn't led to them by that sort of Twitter aspect, which is really quite interesting.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up because I'm always low iron. So I'll have to see. But that's why I think it's so good. Like, I just retested my GI map, my pathogen test, and I think that is an essential part to knowing all this information, because if you have a pathogen, or like I still have H. pylori, which holds in your stomach, which totally makes sense of all these different things I'm having wrong, because you're not able to get your protein digested because there's H. pylori, these guys living in your stomach organ, causing dysfunction to your stomach acid. So then you don't have proper digestion of proteins, and then you don't get your amino acids and your neurotransmitters, and your probably low zinc and B12 and iron. So it's just fascinating that all this stuff you don't know unless you test, that you have no clue that's going on inside of you, that you have this bacteria overgrowth or pathogen, and overabundance of E. coli and all these secondary pathogens that come along once the main invaders come along. They bring their friends and family. So, people have these weird unexplained symptoms. I think it's so important to get all these different tests done. And like you're able to measure, the metabolic efficiency testing is so essential to that too, to check along the way, because it's not as inconvenient as, all the functional labs stool testing and ship them back and wait for results. Yours is a great check-in that people can do periodically if they live near your office.
Yeah. And look, as I said, that's I'm lucky enough to have access to that, but that is essentially our mission, is to be able to test the world's metabolism, is have it like a blood pressure cuff, because it provides such insightful information, as you say. So, you've got you've got people that say, is, for example, low carb or fasting can't be long term, but I've had not an elite athlete, but a middle-aged female who recently completed a half Ironman, and she's been doing these protocols for over a year. So not only has she lost 7 kilos of fat, but I can show that her metabolic rate went from about 1,100 to 1,800. And for example, that if she thinks she can get away with a bit more than she did, so last test is she had a bit of a carb load, and we tested her the day after, and she actually switched back out of fat burning. So that was a bit of a learning tool for her, saying is, well, maybe your body can't, although you are fit and you're performing really well and you're down weight, it shows that you still don't have that metabolic flexibility that maybe some others have, which means there is still consequences of, as I said, those diet cheat days, which is when people ask is, can I have a cheat day? Well, the answer is really depends. For some people, they have one, they get on with it, move on. But for other people, is they can have metabolic damage. It can, I suppose, lead them down that addiction cycle or create that hunger response again, which is possibly a little bit less easy to get out of. So although it seems like it might make it easier, it might make it more challenging down the long run as well.
That's so interesting, because that's why so individual people doing keto, low carb, they're trying to be fat adapted, and people talk about cyclical keto, and especially for women, that sometimes you need to add a little more carbs, and for athletes to refeed a little bit more. But then what if you're metabolically damaged so much that causes you to switch back to carbs and you're not able to switch back to burning fat? You're saying you might need to minimize those higher carb intake days, or they're overindulging too much for their own body's metabolism.
Yeah, and or for instance, I don't have too much experience in carb loading. I generally work with chronic disease, not necessarily athletes, but as I said, getting those carbohydrates from real food sources, which the body may deal a little bit better with, which, as I said, is I don't do too much testing on that, but it's, as I said, once again, what's finding what suits the individual and gets the results for them.
So I'm probably should move on to what's the next one on our list? Addiction. Talk about what you're thinking there.
Yeah, so this has been an interesting one, which keeps coming up, and particularly for the reasons I mentioned before is, I don't have an issue with some, every journey has slip-ups, which is fine. But what it may do, those cheat days may exacerbate the problem and make it more difficult for someone. So what we know is there's generally not a high requirement for carbohydrate or glucose in the body. There's essential fatty acids. They're essential because the body cannot make them, and same with essential amino acids. So I had a post that went crazy on coming back to the Twitter, where it was talking about, I've got a patient who has done really well with metabolic type syndrome, has done really well, lost a whole bunch of weight, reduced their pain, and then emailed me saying that no, they can't do it. They need bread. So obviously, apart from bread alternatives and cooking and things like that, we talked about, well, what else could they do? Obviously, bread alternatives such as chaffles, but it's about going back to their why reasons and maybe having a look at what makes them so addicted to that. Is it the taste? Is it the texture? Are they burning fat, which, as I said, is creating hunger? Are they having enough protein to prevent, that hunger? Are they having enough salt for their neurotransmitters to, as I said, help make it easier in terms of that transition long term, because there is that addictive component with some of the responses. One really interesting one was having a look at something called ODAT, which apparently they use in addiction. And it's talking about taking it one day at a time. You don't need to give up, for example, bread forever. You just need to give it up today. And then tomorrow you can make another decision. And essentially that's been successful in tricking the brain into allowing you to give up an addictive type substance. And Cyrus is a bariatric surgeon, a doctor that's really in tune with these addiction type things, which some people might find of interest, but he uses the analogy of alcohol. You don't say to an alcoholic, you can just have it on weekends.
Yeah.
Or you don't say you can have some of it in the house and just access it when you need it.
Yeah.
It tends not to work like that. So we can learn a lot from those sorts of analogies if people are struggling, which, as I said, I'm not so much sure in the athletic community, but in the chronic disease community, that's what we tend to be finding. And I don't have the answers for it, but there are some things that have come across which may help some individuals. And I've even had one client try hypnotherapy, and she seems to think it has been effective for her. So there's some out of the square type of things is that, it's, and everyone is an N equals 1, and we do need to consider, as I said, some of these other things when we're not only practicing, but some listeners may be able to relate to what is seemingly a new and controversial topic when it comes to diet.
We've talked about this a couple of times, and I just recorded yesterday actually with a friend of mine that I met from KetoCon and her friend Jessica. They work for Keto Evangelist Coaching, but they focus on coaching people that have eating disorders. And then I've also talked to other people, emotional eating. And Trisha Nelson, we did a great podcast on emotional eating. And I really feel like a lot of athletes do have addictive personalities, because a lot of people that choose triathlons or racing in general, any type of running, biking, trail running, they're usually addictive personality, I think. And from my observations, a lot of people do that. And then even myself, I think I got too much into low carb and too much bulletproof coffee and too serious about fasting. We're just that type A personality, and we tend to do more is better. So I think there's a lot of people that take things to the extreme, but food addictions, I think there's a lot of athletes that are probably, battling with food addiction because they try to out exercise binging and overeating. So I think there's, those people that would have chronic diseases, but they're, instead of, sitting around on the sofa eating, they're exercising and trying to burn off all those calories they just consumed, and biking 3 hours and doing 2-hour run and just tearing down their body. So I do think it's out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can post in the show notes. There's an Australian dietitian called Jessica Turton, who she's done a video on the exact topic of, she had her own personal journey about, as you say, is trying to out exercise their binge eating and things like that, and how she found through nutrition, and particularly low carb, high fat, is possibly through balancing, as I said, her blood sugar levels and getting fat burning, how that actually helped with her disordered eating. And she goes through some of the physiology of that talk. So I can pop that up or send it through if you like as well.
That'd be great. I know it's a big thing. So next one is why energy in does not equal energy out.
Yeah, so this is something that obviously we hear every day, and maybe a big one for your listeners is we're just told to exercise more and eat less. But unfortunately, we know in the real world that doesn't work. So we know that, for example, different foods have different hormonal aspects, going back to, for example, that insulin we mentioned before, the adrenaline we mentioned before. And obviously things like protein have a bigger thermogenic effect on our metabolism, so they might burn off more than some of the other foods. That it also has better satiation, so it has different impacts on hunger and hormones, which is why we can't just say you can have 1,000 calories of fries or 1,000 calories of good quality meat and say they have the same impact on the body. energy in does not equal energy out, because our bodies don't work like maths, they work like biology, essentially. And the other thing that we need to consider, going back to the gut, which you mentioned before, is it also depends on their bioavailability. Some people are those type A personalities. I see people graphing everything, even on that old school graph paper, or writing down everything that they're eating. But unfortunately, once again, what's on the labels might not be accurate, but also they might not be absorbing all of that. So it is quite complex. And once again, you do need to be in an energy deficit to lose weight. I do believe that. However, it shouldn't be the main focus, particularly for the clients that we see, is if they're not burning fat, it doesn't matter how much they're burning off. If they're not accessing their glucose at rest, no way are they going to be burning that glucose when they go out for a run. So I had an interesting client that I've been seeing for a couple of months now. She was postpartum, really having hard issues losing weight. And when we tested her, she was actually burning glucose instead of fat. So she was trying really hard. She was doing, I don't know if you guys have F45, high intensity type classes over there. However, that's a stress her body didn't need at that time. Yeah. It's still recovering, it's breastfeeding, those sorts of things. So now she's exercising less, but she's burning 55% fat. And she sent me an email saying she's not too happy. She is very happy, because for the first, she's the same weight she was since her first bump. Even after all that work and just getting frustrated, she thought there was something wrong. But by looking at the data, using that to motivate her by exercising less, which goes against the grain, is she can see big results. As I said, she's less than she was with her first bub, feeling better.
Call a baby a bub?
Yeah. I didn't realize that was maybe some of my Australian slang.
That's all right. I love it. So, but that's what doing health coaching as my main job for the last 3 months, and really loving helping athletes, because it is working on finding their external stressors. And a lot of it is, not my clients are people that just have all sorts of backgrounds with stress, but some people that are working out a lot, that are athletes, they do tend to overtrain. And I see that a lot with people, and they are trying to add that extra stress, the types of workout, like those HIIT training centers. I know F45 is all over here now too. And I was actually read an article in Health Magazine about Mark Wahlberg is an investor in it now. But
I did say that.
Yeah, it's funny because it's everywhere. And I tried to tell people, when you're stressed, especially now going back to coronavirus, you want to exercise less, because more is not better. And I always tell people the same thing: less is more. Don't put your body under more stress by doing, high intensity interval training when you're already stressed out and anxious of life current events, or just having a baby, or whatever it is. Your body will tell you when you need to slow down and then let it heal and repair itself, or when it's trying to protect itself because there's too much going on. It tells you that, but we don't pay attention to those red flags, and we override those signals. So it's interesting. You could probably see that with people switching back to burning sugar, going back to how chronic stress impacts blood sugar regulation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that kind of ties into the next topic, unhealthy athletes. And I keep talking about this over and over again: fit and healthy, or unhealthy on the inside, and you don't know what's under the hood unless you do lab testing. And for you and your metabolic efficiency testing and measuring people's fat burning and glucose burning, what do you find for this unhealthy athlete subject?
Yeah, so for example, I had a patient, he was doing triathlons, but yet when we got his pathology back, he had fatty liver. So once again, I don't know whether it's a fact whether people think they can outrun their diet. But once again, by getting them burning fat, we can help them reduce that fat around that liver and become healthy again. There was an article I sent through a while ago just saying being an athlete doesn't necessarily mean being healthy, similar to the woman I mentioned before in terms of being menopausal. She was doing a lot of running, but by really focusing on that metabolic health and the components of that, she was able to run the half marathon at a lighter weight. And, you know, for other people, it simply means not getting those symptoms of hypos, whether it be from a hike or a big endurance run and things like that as well. So once again, we can't outrun that bad diet, and that metabolic health is so important, and particularly for things like immunity as well. So just because people are being active, we can't neglect all those other important aspects in which you say as well.
Yeah, it's just so crazy how people think, you know, if they exercise, they're healthy. Because I see now with going back to the virus again, but people are walking outside, and I think because we're stuck at home and it's different. But I think people think, oh, if I start exercising now, I'm going to be healthy. But they don't realize health starts with, you know, nutrition and all that we keep talking over and over again about. But, you know, gut health is your immune system and how all this stuff makes an impact. So our last subject is kind of the other part is the importance of sleep for everyone, and how sleep and blood sugars related and chronic stress. And I actually saw a good podcast or blog this morning from Dr. Jockers. He writes really great little informational blogs with great infographics about chronic stress and fatigue, because a lot of people are morning fatigue specifically, but a lot of that's related to blood sugar dysregulation, and that could be related from many different factors, including sleep. And what have your clients taught you about sleep and blood sugar issues and chronic health diseases and obesity?
Yeah, well, essentially the first thing they've taught is that it does impact, poor sleep impacts so many people. But what we do know is, for example, is it can be linked once again to possibly, there are some things that we can change because that's the way it is. It doesn't mean it always has to be like that. So, you know, as I said, their diet can have a huge impact. Caffeine, you know, we're all told not to have coffee before bed, but, you know, for myself and many others, caffeine has a half-life of, I think it's 10 hours or something like that. So even if you have it in the morning, there is still some going through your system, and it might not prevent you from getting to sleep. It might prevent you from getting into deep sleep. We know that people burning glucose, they're essentially, their body's wired up. They're burning glucose. They think they're going to be active. So they might have a hard time getting to sleep. And for those, as I said, nutrition or early time restricted feeding can have a huge impact. And we can't neglect sleep because, you know, it's involved with that memory, that cellular repair, which is not only important for athletes, but their immunity as well, hormone productions. It's there was also a podcast which mentioned the risk of so many diseases, particularly even Alzheimer's, of those that don't sleep as much. So it's definitely not something that we can put on the back burner. And for example, some people say, should I exercise or no, I'll sleep more, like the F45ers. They might get up early every day and not have that rest in morning. Exercise is great. It does improve our fitness. It does have a role in blood glucose regulation and immunity, but I wouldn't say, you know, it's more important than, for example, something like sleep, which has shown even one night bad sleep can impact insulin resistance. And as superficial as it sounds, this podcast by a neuroscientist, Matt Walker, who did a TED talk called Sleep as a Superpower, which might be of interest, is he talked about sleep can impact our attractiveness, which I know sounds superficial, but if you're someone who, a lot of clients I have has polycystic ovarian syndrome, trying to, you know, fall pregnant, it is actually something that we do need to consider, obviously.
Yeah, it's funny. You never correlate that together, but it is, I mean, sleep just, when you're tired, when you don't have a good night's sleep, you feel like crap the next day. Your workout's crap. You probably eat poorly. You don't focus well when you're working. I mean, there's just, it's the whole domino effect. Your just day's a mess. So I learned that the hard way when I went through all my stuff. And, you know, I used to get up at 3:30 in the morning to check email before clients started at 5 a.m. And then I didn't get home till 8 o'clock at night and started over again. And I just really take my sleep seriously and have my clients, when I coach them, I coach in all the elements of the holistic method to make sure sleep, your homework is go to bed, but it's, stop eating 3 hours before bed, create a sleep hygiene routine before bedtime. So, like I keep the fan on in a room, I keep it cold, window open in the winter time. And I have my essential oils, lavender essential oil spray I put on our pillows. And I have this soft spa music on and read my book. At least 3 pages is always my goal. It is just so funny, but my sleep is huge. And if I go to bed too late, which is a challenge right now because I did a whole podcast on creating a schedule and having, a sense of purpose with this new routine, being stuck at home, how important that is to keep that circadian rhythm sleep schedule steady. And, because it's so easy when the late days get longer and it totally messes up my sleep. But if I wake up and I'm tired and my whole day is a mess.
Yeah. Well, actually there's some that suggest is waking time is even more important than getting to bedtime. So even during these times, if you want to trial getting up at the same time of day, can have a big impact at sleep at night. And also in those first 15 minutes, opening the window, I'm assuming it's still sunny over there, is to get that light, which can, as I said, help set your circadian rhythms, which is the way that the hormones and things like that fluctuate throughout the day. Kick that off to the right start can have an impact as well. But for athletes, as you say, I think it's really important. And anyone, we need to prioritize sleep. And I think also one coming about is we need to prioritize protein for things like bone mineral density, maintaining muscle, and those sorts of things as well.
Yeah, definitely a lot of things, I think we can work on now. It's people, hopefully we're not, by the time I post this next month, that we're not still locked at home, but I think a lot of us still will be keeping isolated and away from people or social distance. And, I take it as, again, what is a gift? And it's to work on yourself, work on your health, the holistic method, the nutrition, exercise, stress, and all of that, and creating a new routine while you are at home. I posted today on my page on Facebook saying, the new meaning to me of breakfast, lunch, and dinner means walk outside. It doesn't mean eat. It means get outside, because we're home all day and it's weird. And so I work out in the morning and I create our own little workout and I have us go for a walk outside when the sun's coming up. And I'm happy to do this because I never could do this before, because I always had personal training clients at 7 a.m. So I never got to, go for a walk and relax and just enjoy the sounds of the birds chirping and the sun coming up and the fresh air. And so that's a gift for me. And walking at lunchtime and, spending a little more quality time with my husband. And so I think, right now is a good time to work on that. And intermittent fasting is huge for people to do while they're at home, because I have a lot of people saying, oh, I'm, like I said earlier, overeating. And one, you shouldn't buy the crap. If you have crap in your house, why do you buy it? You have a choice what you choose to stock your house up when people are all running to the grocery store trying to stock up that they're not going to be able to go to the grocery store again. And it's so funny. It's like, okay, I got this butcher box delivery that gives us steak and burgers and we have salmon and getting all this good stuff. I didn't go buy a bunch of, I don't know what people are buying, frozen meals and candy and chips and just junk to keep everyone entertained like they're going camping for a month.
Yeah, as I said, it's unknown territory. I know not everyone's lucky enough, like myself, we've got a deep freezer and that we can store a lot of meat in and things like that, but it's about using it as a learning curve. And as I said, hopefully not setting off some of those addiction type pathways, not sleeping poorly, which, as I said, particularly looking down the long road, long track ahead, as you say, it's not necessarily about what you're doing now, but also in 10, 20 years time is, do we want Alzheimer's? Do we really want to increase that risk? And now's time to work on some patterns that can really help us not only get through this time, but down the track as well in terms of our health and longevity.
Mm-hmm. You listen to the podcast. Yeah. That's what I always think is like what we're doing now. I want to be, I'm thinking of what's 30 years from now. And when you're like the people that are getting the coronavirus and dying, it's because they're older, but does that mean you have to be unhealthy and a poor immune system? I mean, that's because what we do now is going to contribute to our future life and our health status. So I think it's so hopefully a big motivator for people to start, an eye opener of what to do. And, for athletes not to overtrain and people staying up till midnight because they don't have to get up at a set time anymore, and just getting their whole sleep schedule out of whack and eating throughout the day and snacking mindlessly. And I think it's a great opportunity, as I started to say, doing intermittent fasting, 16 hours and eat in that 8-hour window and have 2 meals and stop snacking, and just hydrating and getting that bone broth and getting all those good nutrients you need to provide your gut with the good nutrients to stay strong and improve that immune system.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say, is when we have a look at the data, is we know those people who with poorer outcomes with the outbreak at the moment is, yes, age is a factor, but we also know there's a lot of people under 50 with dying or really poor outcomes stuck in ICU beds who are overweight. And as I said, metabolic health is the driver. And a UK cardiologist, Asima Haltra, did a really quick, good little video on this, which I can post in show notes to show you. As I said, it just highlights that there's some things out of our control, with, for example, age, but there is definitely some things within our control, because this thing, although there's an outbreak at the moment, is whether it's, they predict that 60 to 80% of people are going to get it. So it might not be now, it might be down the track, or whether it's another virus or just a general illness, that your body's ability to recover from that, it's impacted by metabolic health, which comes down to all these things that we chatted about today.
Well, we have exciting jobs. Hopefully, we can really help people with what we're all doing. So I'm excited to see what happens in the health coaching industry and what you're doing over in your side of the world with the metabolic health solutions clinics. And hopefully they can expand to other countries, and we can help everyone stay healthy as they age and stay strong.
Yeah, definitely interesting times, but I said it's a really good opportunity to even, look at some of the videos that you tend to put in the back burner, educate yourself. I know on my list of reading is Nadia Pereguana with Jason Fung. They've written a book about PCOS, which might be valuable to some listeners as well. So it's about, as I said, taking this opportunity that we have at home, which is easier said than done, and exploring some of those things. And I think there is definitely hope down the track in terms of everything that obviously yourself and I'm so passionate about, in terms of, over here in Western Australia, the government put out a diabetes inquiry to help with the management. A lot of the things suggested were rejected, but at least people are thinking about it. The American Diabetes Association, the president herself has a huge focus. She's diabetic, and she has a huge focus on nutrition and reducing that carbohydrate load and fruit intake, which we've never seen before. And the Endocrine Society is LDL, part of your cholesterol, is not listed as one of the 5 major risk factors. It's all this stuff to do with metabolic health. So, and I don't know whether you've had it, but I've got GPs starting to ask about insulin, or
Wow.
a nurse saying is, I did have a client who came in with an MI, myocardial infarction, which is a heart attack, and not have high cholesterol. So I think tides are changing, and as I said, there is some light at the end of the tunnel, although it's sometimes definitely hard to see it. And I know myself during these challenging times. And but yeah, as I said, take opportunity, upskill, educate yourself, and hopefully we'll use it as a wake-up call to get on the right track, even personally, or hopefully at that bigger level in terms of healthcare, knowing the importance of metabolic health and lifestyle.
Yeah. Amen. All right. We'll put everything in the show notes, and I know you'll send me some great articles and videos people can watch too. And I'll put some, the ones you sent me earlier in there on sleep. And I have this one on your thyroid needs dietary carbohydrates and all sorts of things. Does your thyroid need dietary carbohydrates? So lots of good stuff, as always, my friend. So thanks for coming on the show and waking up with me. Hopefully you have a good day ahead of you.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it starts off the day pretty well. You get your thinking cap on straight away. I've had a coffee whilst doing this, and ready to try and get some resources out and attack the day.
Yay. And I'm ending my day. So I appreciate your time, and we'll look forward to speaking with you again on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. Thanks for touching base. Hope everything goes well.
Thanks for listening to the Low Carb Athlete Podcast. If you have any questions, feedback, or topic suggestions, let us know on Facebook or at debbiepotts.net. You can help us to continue to grow by leaving a review on iTunes. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.